for my presentation will be a lecture rather than my usual style. Grace Hopper, At the Speed of Light, a story in 3 acts. Act 1, Cleveland. The spring semester of my college freshman year, Case Institute of Technology celebrated the centennial of its founding. 2 of the lecture's presenters came my heroes, yet I almost did not attend the Grace Hopper lecture. I tell you why, but first, some historical and personal context of the time. It's a story of innovation and of stagnation, of opportunity and diversity, and the story of a naive young man. I had just arrived in Cleveland after a winter break at the Terminal Tower, and as I took the bus to University Circle, I passed by scenes of decay and stagnation. At this time, Cleveland was the target of many jokes by comedians like Bob Hope and Johnny Carson about the river that caught on fire or the mayor that ignited his own hair. Cleveland wasn't always the mistake on the lake. Let's turn back the clock a century when Euclid Avenue was the original Millionaire's Row. This is where captains of industry and innovation built their mansions. First in line is the Amasa Stone Mansion. Not only was Amasa Stone the director of 2 different railroads, he played a critical role in helping the Standard Oil Company form its monopoly. He was a major force in Cleveland banking, coal, and steel industries. Next in line is the Jephthah Wade Mansion. Jephthah Wade was instrumental in the consolidation of the telegraph industry by forming Western Union through a series of acquisitions and mergers. J.D. Rockefeller, as mentioned before, built this modest mansion. Rockefeller revolutionized the oil industry. He innovated with horizontal and vertical integration, created new products out of waste, such as Vaseline. He played regional railroads against each other and extracted secret rebates for Standard Oil shipments and drawbacks for his competitors' shipments. Standard Oil's first refinery was in Cleveland and later contributed to that burning river. This is the Brush Mansion. Charles F. Brush was an inventor and industrialist. Brush invented and manufactured the carbon arc light years before the incandescent light bulb. He created and patented the first electrical dynamos. This 12-kilowatt wind turbine, the first wind turbine, charged the batteries in the cellar of his mansion. Just so happens my sister-in-law graduated from Brush High School in Lyndhurst. These captains of industry helped fund and oversee the Case School of Applied Science. Case hired world-renowned faculty, including future Nobel laureate Albert Michelson. His obsession was measuring the speed of light with great precision. From the Greek philosophers to the current physicists, the nature of light has been debated. Is it a wave? Is it a particle? If it's a wave, then there must be a medium in which light modulates. In order to get a more precise measure of the speed of light, Michelson needed to know the drift speed of ether, the medium in which light travels. Morley, a chemistry professor from neighboring Western Reserve College, helped him devise the famous Michelson-Morley experiment to measure this drift. They put an interferometer onto a big brick, which was floated on a column of mercury. Splitting the light into 2 perpendicular paths, the drift current should be measurable. This experiment unexpectedly produced a null result. There was no difference in the speed of light in the 2 different paths. This challenged the fundamental understanding of the nature of light. So what happened to turn from scientific and industrial innovation into stagnation? Let's fast forward through the century. In 1878, Western Union failed to change their business model, turning down purchasing the rights to the telephone. For a measly $100,000, they could have had the rights. By 1909, AT&T gained control of Western Union, and in 1913 was forced to sell off its shares due to the Sherman Antitrust Act. Today, Western Union only exists because of its evolution into a funds transfer agent. Rush lost his first mover advantage after failing to adapt to Edison's incandescent light bulb. Due to the Sherman Antitrust Act, Rockefeller's enterprise was split into 7 companies. Rockefeller left Cleveland after a legal and tax dispute. He was unable to return to Ohio due to an arrest warrant for his failure to pay that disputed tax bill. Michelson and Morley's experiment puzzled physicists for 20 years until Einstein proposed a special theory of relativity. The hundreds of U.S. railroads consolidated down to 4 principal companies, and thousands of miles of rails were abandoned. Enabled by the railroads, African Americans left the South for economic opportunity. The Great Migration supplied cheap labor to the unchanging northern oil, auto, coal, and steel industries. Redlining, segregation, and unequal treatment led to civil protests. Not wanting to deal with these civil protests, Cleveland's mayor asked for the National Guard to put down the so-called Huff riots. 40 people were injured and 4 African Americans were killed. The year that my eldest sister was accepted into Kent State University, the governor sent the National Guard to disrupt civil protests. And on May 4th, 4 students were killed. As a protest, the recently formed CWRU Faculty Senate banned ROTC from campus. Old Kings Main was torn down, and a memorial fountain was installed at the location of the original Michelson-Morley experiment. Thus ends the fast forward through the century, and I have arrived at University Circle. That's a historical context. I'll continue with the personal context. Act 2, the young man. Rewinding a decade. As a youngster, I played with Lego, fixed my bike, and ran around the neighborhood. I found an alarm clock in the alley and was introduced to the world of motors and electricity as I dismantled it. Scrounging in more alleys, I also found a garage door opener, a vacuum tube tester, an oscilloscope. These were great resources for relays, switches, dials, gears, transformers to build multiple gadgets. I avidly read Theodore Nelson's anti-authority Computer Lib Dream Machines, advocating wresting control of computers from the computer priestdom and using them to educate and unlift. This book actually contains the first publication of hypertext. My first physical contact with a computer was in high school. The math room had 3 Wang Laboratories 2200 word processors with built-in BASIC. At age 18, I was faced with a circumstance that every male born in the US has, registering with the Selective Service. My eldest brother is Class 1A with a low lottery number. During the active war in Vietnam, he was planning to flee to Canada if drafted. Although we were no longer in Vietnam, who knew when a proxy war would escalate into something larger? That summer, I read D.D. McCracken's Algol Guide to study for a proficiency test to waive the introductory computing class, CMPS 131. I don't remember what the problems were that we had to solve, but I do remember the card punches and the card reader printer. This was our access to the case 1107, immortalized by Donald Knuth in the dedication in the art of computer programming. On campus, I was a prankster. During my scrounging, I found a banker's box of 9-track mag tape and punch cards in a dumpster. I and others used this to create an art installation in the student center. I liberated a frightened mechanical calculator from a forgotten storage closet, and this became a conversation piece in our dorm room. On a dare, I and many of the guys from the dorm went for a swim in the Michelson-Morley fountain. There were many other pranks which will remain unmentioned to protect the guilty. Now, my roommate Ira and I had a photography assignment to look for new perspectives. These are photos from that shoot. The fountain was drained every winter, so I actually got up inside that fountain column. In the upper left-hand corner, it's me taking a picture of Ira as I'm up in the fountain. This upper right-hand picture, that's Ira's picture of me up at the top of the fountain with my back to him. And this is the picture I took of him from the top of the fountain. And finally, this is a picture we both took of each other reflecting in the fountain column. Back to the upcoming lecture. I had every reason not to attend. I had lab, I had homework, I had everything to finish. I had work. What could I possibly learn from this authority figure? To attend, I would have to change my mind. What could possibly change my mind? What could change my attitude towards the military and towards reservists? Well, I could see how Detroit failing to change had allowed the Japanese automakers to dominate the market. I could see how Cleveland and Pittsburgh failing to change the steel and coal industries allowed innovating foreign companies to capture these markets. If I didn't open myself to possibilities, what would I miss? Additionally, I enjoyed every event in the Persistence of Surrealism Festival the prior semester. Every institution in the university circle participated. There were plays and dances, music performances, readings, films, galleries of art. Perhaps a different reality allowed me to take a chance with future possibilities, hardware, software, and people. Act 3, the lecture. To make this lecture a little less meta, suspend your frame of reference. Your narrator will assume the persona of Captain Grace Hopper. To help you with this transition, picture me as a small elderly woman in a Navy uniform with wispy white hair peeking out from underneath my cap. I have just finished smoking my latest Lucky Strikes Unfiltered and sweep down the aisle, followed by my entourage. How did I, a Vassar associate professor of mathematics, become the grandmother of COBOL? Until 1944, I had been a thoroughly respectable mathematician. I had never met a digit, and I wanted nothing to do with digits. I came into the computer business in a unique fashion. This is the story of becoming the grandmother of COBOL, starting with being a curious child. I always wanted to know how things worked. In 1913, at the age of 7, I dismantled my bedroom clock just to figure out how the alarm worked. Taking it apart was easy, but I couldn't figure out how the parts would reassemble. I took apart another clock to figure out how the parts went together. As you can imagine, by the time my mother noticed what I had been up to, I had dismantled all 7 clocks in the house. When my mother found out, instead of scolding me, she just said, "Grace, leave it with 1 clock at a time, please." At that time, my family summered at Lake Wentworth. I spent many hours on the lake in a sail canoe. Once a sharper than usual gust of wind caught my craft and capsized it. My mother, watching from the porch, merely picked up the megaphone she kept handy for such occasions and called out, "Remember your great-grandfather, the Commodore." With this admonition not to abandon ship, I clung to the upturned canoe and kicked it safely back to shore. My great-grandfather, Commodore Alexander Wilson Russell, fought in the Battle of Mobile Bay during the Civil War. When Pearl Harbor was attacked in 1941, I immediately enlisted in the Navy, just like my great-grandfather. I was rejected for a few reasons. At age 34, I was too old to enlist, and my weight-to-height ratio was too low. I was also denied on the basis that my position as an associate mathematics professor was valuable to the war effort. I persisted and received an exemption in 1943 to enlist in the WAVES. For the young people out in the audience, WAVES is an acronym: Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service. I was ordered to the Navy liaison officer at Harvard. I left midshipman school on Friday, and on Monday morning, 2nd July 1944, I reported to the Navy liaison officer, Harvard. He took me by the hand and led me over to an underground laboratory. I had just acquired 1.5 stripes. There stood a large object with 3 stripes who took one look at me and said, "Where the hell have you been?" I spluttered and said I had 2 days travel time. He said, "For the last 3 months." I said, "Midshipman school?" And he said he had told them it was not necessary. By this time, I was practically cowering, of course, but with 1.5 stripes, I would stand up straight and listen to 3 stripes. He waved his hand and said, "That's a computing machine." I said, "Yes, sir." What else could I say? He said he would like to have me compute the coefficients of the arctangent series for Thursday. Again, what could I say? "Yes, sir." I did not know what on earth what was happening, but that was my meeting with Howard Hathaway Aiken. There was this large mass of machinery out there making a lot of racket. It was all bare, all open, and very noisy. It was 51 feet long, 8 feet high, 8 feet deep, and had 72 words of storage, and could perform 3 additions a second. Howard also flatly informed me that he had told the Bureau of Navy personnel not to send him a female. Perhaps the Bureau of Navy personnel had thought that a Vassar Associate Professor of Mathematics would fit in the Harvard computer pool. In 1944 and before, computers were not machines. Computers were highly educated women who used paper and mechanical calculators to perform numerical methods. There was no manual for the Mark I. To compute the coefficients of the arctangent series, I needed to look at basic blueprints of the circuits and picked up hints from discussions with Richard Bloch and so on. They were just piles of prints. Dick took the night shift and I took the day shift. Late at night, Dick would sometimes fiddle with the hardware of the Mark I, which would cause problems for the code I had written. Every time I got a program running, he'd get in there late at night and change the circuits in the computer, and the next morning the program would not run. What's more, he was home asleep and couldn't tell me what he had done. All hell broke loose. I would curse at him and Dick would look at me with amusement. Howard didn't look at these things with great humor. Dick was always getting into trouble. I would try to explain to him that Aiken was just like a computer. He's wired a certain way, and if you are going to work with him, you must realize how he is wired. The Mark I was used for computing rocket trajectories, creating range tables for new anti-aircraft guns, and calibrating minesweepers. In addition to Navy work, our team completed calculations for the Army and ran numbers used by John von Neumann in developing the plutonium bomb dropped on Nagasaki. I learned languages of oceanography, of this whole business of minesweepers, of detonators, of proximity fuses, of biomedical stuff. We had to learn their vocabularies in order to be able to run their programs. I could switch my vocabulary and speak highly technical for the programmers and then tell the same things to the managers a few hours later, but with a totally different vocabulary. Howard came to my desk one day and said, "You are going to write a book." "I can't write a book," I said. "I've never written one." "Well, you're in the Navy now," he declared. "You are going to write one." I said, "Yes, sir." What else could I say? So I wrote the first computer user guide and programming manual, a 561-page textbook for the Mark I that was both a history and a guide to programming it. Every evening, I read to Howard the pages I had written that day. He pointed out that if you stumble when you try to read it aloud, you'd probably better fix that sentence. Every day I had to read 5 pages of what I had written. The Mark II was in a building without window screens. One night, the machine conked out and Dick wasn't responsible. So we began looking for the problem. We found a moth that had gotten smashed in one of the relays. The moth was retrieved and pasted in the logbook with Scotch tape. Panel F, moth and relay, I wrote. First actual case of bug being found. Thereafter, whenever Howard asked why code wasn't running, I responded with, "We haven't got the bugs out yet." Another couple of words that are interesting are loop and patch. A repeating loop for the Mark series was an actual loop of punched paper instructions that continuously fed into the machine. A software patch referred to the paper patches applied over the erroneously punched holes in that tape. Once patched, it could be repunched with the correct instruction. After the war, I joined the UNIVAC team. One problem that continued from the Mark series to the UNIVAC was coder productivity. Building up an original program was complex, so we would borrow routines. If I needed a sine routine angle less than pi over 4, I'd whistle at Dick and say, "Can I have your sine routine?" And I'd copy it out of his notebook. We were using subroutines. We were copying routines from one program into another. There were two things wrong with that technique. One was that the subroutines all started at line 0 and went on sequentially from there. When you copied them into another program, you therefore had to add all those addresses as you copied them into the new program. You had to add all those addresses, and programmers are lousy adders. The second thing that inhibited this was that programmers are lousy copyists. And it was amazing how many times a 4 would turn into a delta, which was our space symbol, or into an A. And even B's turned into 13s. All sorts of interesting things happened when programmers tried to copy subroutines. And there, of course, stood a gadget whose whole purpose was to copy things accurately and to do addition. And it therefore seemed sensible, instead of having programmers copy the subroutines, to have the computer copy the subroutines. Out of that came the A0 compiler. I took all the subroutines I had collected over the years and put them on tape. Each routine was given a call number so that the machine could find it on tape. All I had to do was write down a set of call numbers and let the computer find them on tape, bring them over, and do the additions. This was the first compiler. I had a running compiler, and nobody would touch it because they carefully told me computers can only do arithmetic. They cannot do programs. It was a selling job to get people to try it. I think that with any new idea, because people are allergic to change, you have to get out and sell the idea. A2 was actually the first open source library. We would take contributions and add subroutines to the A2. I'm trying to change people's minds. People have an enormous tendency to resist change. They love to say, "We've always done it this way." I try to fight that. That's why I have the clock on the wall. And I'm now going to make you a gift that will stay with you for the rest of your life. For the rest of your life, every time you say, "We've always done it that way," my ghost will appear and haunt you for 24 hours. A0, A1, and A2 saved enough time for UNIVAC programmers that management gave me a team, the Automatic Programming Group. I despise that name. We weren't doing automatic programming. We were just developing tools for programmers to program more efficiently. Marketing loved that name, though. Our December 53 report proposed to the management that mathematical programs should be written in mathematical notation, data processing programs should be written in English statements, and we would be delighted to supply 2 corresponding compilers to translate to machine code. I was promptly told I could not do that. And this time the reason was that computers couldn't understand English words. Well, I allowed as to how I never expected any computer to anywhere to understand anything, that all I intended to do was compare bit patterns. We wrote it anyway, or at least a demo version. We got our little compiler running. It wouldn't take more than 20 statements. And on the back of this report, we put in a nice little program in English. And we said, "Dear kind management, if you come down to the machine room, we'll be delighted to run this program for you." It was not until January of 55 that we were able to write a formal proposal for writing a data processing compiler. I keep it with me for a couple of reasons. One, to remind me I always have to push into the future. And the other, to remind me that at any given moment in time, there's always a line out there. And that line represents what your management will believe in at that moment in time. And you just step over that line and you won't get the budget. I showed an executive that Flowmatic could translate programs written in French or German into machine language. The executive was shocked that a machine built in the USA could do anything in a foreign language, and he kicked me out of his office. That hit the fan. It was absolutely obvious that a respectable American computer built in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, could not possibly understand French or German. And it took us 4 months to say, no, 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 we wouldn't think of programming it in anything but English. In '59, coding was getting even more expensive. Mary Hawes over at Burroughs Corporation called for a meeting of representatives from academia, computer users, and manufacturers. We asked the Department of Defense, the DoD, to sponsor an effort to create a common business language. The committee examined Flowmatic and Comtran. Various proposals kept wanting to bring in the Comtran formulas. Now, I used to be a mathematics professor. At that time, I found that there were a certain number of students who could not learn mathematics. I then was charged with the job of making it easy for businessmen to use our computers. I found it was not a question of whether they could learn mathematics or not, but whether they would. They said, throw those symbols out. I do not know what they mean. I have not time to learn symbols. I suggest a reply to those who would like data processing people to use mathematical symbols, that they first make the attempt to teach those symbols to vice presidents or a colonel or an admiral. I assure you that I have tried it. I kept calling for more user-friendly languages. I've always tried to do that. That's why I want these other languages that are aimed at people. Most of the stuff we get from academics, computer science people, is in no way adapted to people. In '67, the US Navy requested me to rejoin the reserve at a rank of commander and work in the Pentagon in Arlington County, Virginia, to sort out COBOL. Versions of COBOL from different computer companies had diverged so much that programs that ran on one computer could no longer run on others. This was totally contrary to the spirit of COBOL. I was given a staff, a Pentagon office, but no equipment. I told my midshipmen, if it isn't bolted down, bring it home. If anyone gives you trouble, tell them to come to me. They managed to procure me desks and chairs and a couple of computers. I am fascinated by the possibilities of these S100 computers. Experts tell me they don't have enough memory to support a serious compiler, but we wrote Flowmatic for computers with much less memory. I directed my boys to write a COBOL compiler for the S100 they found. I think it's possible to connect these computers together more effectively than building larger central computers. In pioneer days, they used oxen for heavy pulling. And when one ox couldn't budge a log, they didn't try to grow a larger ox. They'd bring in another couple oxen to pull that log. We shouldn't be trying for bigger computers, but for more systems of computers. I can see people are going to need these things and the amount of information will increase. And I still think it's going to increase even more. I don't think we've even begun to realize how much we are going to have to do with these computers. That memorial fountain you have outside, Michelson was a very smart man, a Naval Academy graduate. He could tell you exactly how many inches per second light will travel. But generals don't understand why there is a delay in satellite communications. To explain, I got my boys to create some visual aids. I had them get some wire and cut it into 11.8 inch lengths. Generals will understand millions and billions, not billions. So a geosynchronous satellite is 22,000 miles from Earth, about 100 million of these. I said 100 million up and 100 million down. That's 200 milliseconds, a fifth of a second. Here's a nanosecond. It's 11.8 inches, not 30 centimeters. Of course, light travels at 11.8 inches per nanosecond in a vacuum, slower in air, as Michelson could tell you. Now let me show you my microsecond. This braid of wire is 960 feet long and weighs about 1.5 pounds. Makes a great epaulette or noose. I would like to hang this braid of wire around the neck of any programmer who uttered, "Don't worry, it's only a microsecond or two." I would show you my millisecond, but it was too heavy to get into my luggage. I left it at the Pentagon. I will leave you with a few thoughts. We've tended to forget that no computer will ever ask a new question. To me, programming is more than an important practical art. It is also a gigantic undertaking in the foundations of knowledge. Now, you young people in the future, we must provide for you. We must give you the positive leadership you are looking for. Now, remember, you manage things, you lead people. Don't forget to collect your nanosecond as you leave. Epilogue. What struck me after that lecture were our similarities. We were both pirates. We were both curious. We were both challenging the status quo. I kept my nanosecond in the spine of the calendar for that year. I still have it after 42 years. 2 years after I attended the lecture, President Ronald Reagan promoted Captain Hopper to Commodore by special appointment. She remained on active duty beyond the mandatory retirement by special approval of Congress. In 1985, the rank of Commodore was renamed Rear Admiral. One of my favorite quotes from Captain Grace Hopper. If it's a good idea, go ahead and do it. It's much easier to apologize than it is to get permission. Thank you for spending the time listening to me about one of my heroes, Captain Grace Hopper. If I did not attend that lecture in 1980, I do not know who I'd be today. I'm amazed about what she was able to accomplish in that adversarial environment. And my ask of you is that when you hear yourself saying, "We've always done it that way," challenge yourself to find another way. And if you don't, the ghost of grace will get you.